Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. This is a press conference with the Special Rapporteur on the Human Rights of Migrants, Mr. Felipe González Morales. He spoke to the Third Committee yesterday and presented his report. I think you have been circulated that link to the report. I just also wanted to say that there's a press statement that if you haven't got it already, it's on its way, that the Special Rapporteur has issued along with the Chair of the Committee on the Protection of the Rights of all Migrant Workers and their members of their families, the Chair of the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the Committee, and the Special, the Chair of the Committee on the Rights of the Child. So the four organizational bodies have issued this press statement on the separation of children from undocumented migrant parents and saying that it is inhumane and has dire effects on children. So without further ado, I'd like to ask Mr. González Morales to make some few comments and then we'll have questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much and good morning. I will briefly start by describing the mandate of the Special Rapporteur of the Human Rights of Migrants. This is a mechanism that was established almost 20 years ago, which has competence on all states of the United Nations, regardless of the fact that they have or have not ratified any treaties. So it's a general, universal competence that this mandate has. This year I prepared two thematic reports. The first one was on the issue of returns and reintegration of migrants, which analyzes this issue worldwide, and the standards and practices were good or bad. And the second, and that report I presented it to the Human Rights Council in Geneva in June. And at this year General Assembly, I presented yesterday a thematic report on access to justice for migrants. This is an issue of major concern in many countries, and the report analyzes, for instance, the right to legal representation, to be represented by a lawyer, the right to have access to a judge, the right to have consular assistance, the right to have also an interpreter when it is needed, and another matter that is of major importance, which is the need to establish firewalls or a strong separation between the migration offices and our public offices. So, for instance, a migrant, where he or she is in a regular or irregular status, can go to a tribunal without fear of being detained and deported. So what the report says is that the judiciary should not tell the agencies on migration about the status of these migrants. And the same for our public agencies as hospitals, education institutions, and so forth. Yesterday I had a very good exchange of views with states. After my presentation, many states did interventions and I responded to them. Of course, the issue of access to justice was one that was at the center of the discussion, as was the matter of the report. But also another matter that was addressed specifically was the issue of the Global Compact on Migration. This agreement by the states was pre-adopted here in the UN headquarters in July, and it is expected that in December in Marrakesh it will be definitely adopted. This is a significant step in establishing international regulations on migration policies. It is expected that almost all the states of the UN are going to adopt this Global Compact and the human rights mechanisms at the United Nations, such as my office, the treaty bodies on human rights, and so forth. We expect to have a significant place in the follow-up and implementation of this agreement. Another issue, which is more specific, and I will end up with this, is the issue of detention of migrants and also the separation of children from undocumented migrant parents. That is the matter of our joint press release. Detention of migrants based on their migratory status is also analyzed in the report on access to justice. This is a matter of concern that I have raised previously in communications to several governments, including the United States and several countries in Europe, Africa, and Asia. And as a general matter, I would say that the human rights mechanisms at the United Nations have repeatedly called to stop the detention of children based on the migratory status and to understand and make effective the detention of adult migrants only as a measure of last resort. The Global Compact on Migration establishes that detention of adult migrants is going to be a measure of last resort. In the end, after many negotiations, it doesn't say explicitly that detention of migrant children based on their migratory status is forbidden, as we, the Special Rapporteurs, have said, but it calls the states towards ending the practice of children detention, and in any event to use it only in very exceptional circumstances. And that's why this is a matter of major concern for us, that this is continuing practice in some countries. I would say in many countries this is no longer a practice, detention of migrant children. But unfortunately in some of them it continues to be a regular practice. So I will stop here and will give you the floor.
Thank you very much. Questions? Yes, please. If you could identify your news organization, please. Thank you.
Gracias por este briefing. Thank you for the briefing. I'm Celia Mendoza from VOA Latin America. You're mentioning several topics that are important throughout the report that you gave. One of the main things that we have seen lately is the separation of families, like as you mentioned, from children detained and parents that are detained. That is a fear that has been sparked by the move of the caravan coming from Honduras to the United States. What is your take on what is happening in terms of the movement of people and the rights that it might be guaranteed to those moving through that caravan, and the threats by the United States president of closing the border, militarize the border, as well as eventually separating families or sending back without the possibility of asking for refuge as if they want to? And if possible, could you answer in Spanish?
Sure, it's easier.
Thank you.
For me. Bueno, yo quisiera poner la respuesta a su pregunta en contexto, en el sentido del peso que tiene el componente de seguridad y el peso que tiene el componente de derechos humanos en las políticas migratorias. Esta fue una enorme discusión durante la elaboración del Pacto Global sobre Migración. De hecho, están los dos componentes allí. Es muy difícil decir en qué medida está más uno o más otro. Si uno analiza los tratados de derechos humanos, el Global Compact no es un tratado de derechos humanos probablemente, si uno analiza los tratados de derechos humanos, el centro son estos derechos justamente. Y la seguridad es una de las limitaciones posibles a algunos derechos, no a todos, no a la vida, no a la integridad personal y a una serie de otros tampoco. Entonces, desde el punto de vista del derecho internacional de los derechos humanos, incluyendo tratados que ha ratificado Estados Unidos, debe ser los derechos humanos el núcleo central de sus políticas migratorias. Y sin perjuicio de que consideraciones de seguridad son legítimas, estos no pueden ser a costa de violar los derechos humanos de las personas. Ahora, cuando uno analiza situaciones colectivas como la que usted plantea, de la caravana migrante, uno tiene que mirar esto en ese contexto justamente. Porque estas cosas no ocurren por casualidad y las políticas migratorias adecuadas también dependen de los contextos. Y en este sentido, por ejemplo, de manera repetida, los órganos internacionales de derechos humanos, no solo esta relatoría especial, pero otros mecanismos y también a nivel regional interamericano, han llamado a aquellos países que tienen una cantidad de inmigrantes en situación irregular a conducir procesos de regularización. Esto no significa que todos los estados tengan que regularizar a todos y cada uno de los migrantes, pero cuando hay volúmenes importantes de migrantes en esa situación, la única solución apropiada es esa. Y en este sentido, cuando se produce este tipo de movimientos masivos de migrantes, hay que atender también a cuáles son las causas que lo están provocando y las medidas que se adopten en relación con ellos tienen que ser adecuadas y proporcionales. Entonces, por ejemplo, debe tomarse en serio por parte de los estados la determinación de la condición de refugiado de aquellos que la soliciten. Deben realizarse consideraciones humanitarias también en relación con los vínculos familiares que puedan tener, etcétera, etcétera, etcétera. Entonces yo diría que esa es el paraguas dentro del cual hay que analizar estas políticas y la reacción que pueda tener Estados Unidos o México también.
For the benefits of those who don't speak Spanish, could you just summarize what you said? Is that too difficult to remember? Right. And if you wouldn't mind keeping the Spanish answers till afterwards, because this is supposed to be conducted in English, I'm sorry. Can you summarize what you said? Thank you.
Yes, well, I was saying that it's easier for me to do it first in Spanish and then in
Good.
No, I was saying that on the issue of migration policies, always in this discussion, these debates, the component of security and the component of human rights are in tension. And this was the case of the discussion about the preparation of the Global Compact on Migration. And I wouldn't be able to say really to what extent security or human rights weighs more within the Global Compact on Migration. Now, the Global Compact is not a human rights treaty. It has human rights elements, but it's not a human rights treaty. And if you see the human rights treaties, including those which have been ratified by the United States, Mexico, and the countries of Central America, you will find out that human rights are at the core there, and that they have to be interpreted in a broad manner, and the limitations, including security, are to be narrowly interpreted. So this should serve as a guide for analyzing the migration policies. Now, when you come to the issue of massive movements of migrants, such in the case of this caravan, states have to be careful in having responses that are according to international law. And this means that if some of them are seeking asylum, for instance, the state has to consider seriously those requests doing individual assessments. It also means that the state should do humanitarian considerations as well, and so forth. And they should consider what are the situation they're escaping from on many occasions, including potential affectations of the right to life.
Thank you so much. Yes, please. English, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, of course, no worries. Alejandro Rincon with NTN 24. I have a follow-up on the migrant caravan, and what I'm wondering is, as the migrant caravan is making its way towards the U.S., there's really an uncertainty as to how the White House and the Trump administration is going to finally face this. Last summer, we saw the implementation of the zero-tolerance policy. So we are actually not certain what is going to happen when it finally reaches the southern border between the U.S. and Mexico. So first of all, can you give us your evaluation on the consequence and the impact for migrants of this zero-tolerance policy? And also, do you have any concern in particular as to the attitude from the current U.S. government for this second wave of migrants who are pretty much very close to, or they're getting closer to coming to the U.S.?
Thank you.
Right. Let me start by saying that I requested an official visit to the United States several months ago. This was first requested in March this year, and then I sent a follow-up letter. I have not gotten an official response. Only they accused the receipt of the letter, but not a real answer to my question. And of course, it would be very important to have the chance to conduct an official visit and be able to see firsthand how are the migratory policies, and including the situation including this type of situation, the current situation, and also to be able to prepare a country report, which I cannot do if I cannot conduct a country visit. Regardless of that, I have issued a number of press releases and sent communications to the government of the United States regarding different aspects of its migratory policies, and this has included the issue of how they deal with the migrants who come to the border, that security concerns should not overshadow the human rights commitments that the U.S., as any other government, has according to international law, meaning that they have to take seriously the requests for asylum that some of them may have, or that humanitarian considerations should be taken into account, including the fact that many of these people may be escaping from serious risks to their lives.
Thank you. Further questions? Yes, please.
Thank you. Mario Villar con la agencia EFE, and I'll do it in English too. How is this current rhetoric against migrants that we are seeing around the world, both in the United States, but as well in Europe, impacting the human rights of migrants worldwide? Have you seen deterioration of their current situation in the past few years? Thank you.
Well, as you say, there is an increasing rhetoric against migrants, which amounts to xenophobic discourse in many countries. I would say there are a number of countries where the situation has improved also in this regard, but in those countries where those countries of destination where many migrants are coming, effectively there has taken place this trend towards a xenophobic discourse. Of course, this has a direct impact on the migrants in terms that they are stigmatized and their own dignity is affected. And it also has many other kinds of impacts on the migrants. For instance, migrants might have fear to go to public spaces or go to a tribunal to present a complaint on any other issue because they will be afraid that they're going to be attacked there, or their complaints are not going to be taken seriously. They might be afraid to go to other public services like hospitals, or send their children to schools and so forth, or to engage in the community. So if some countries or some governments say that they expect the migrants to have a stronger interaction with the national, well, that is not going to occur if the migrants are being harassed and stigmatized, and in the end they become isolated. So I would say that there is the direct impact on their dignity, and then there are all these violations of human rights that are the consequence of that xenophobic discourse. And this is part of a trend that exists in a number of countries of destination, of criminalizing the migration. Sometimes this goes along the adoption of laws that expressly establish as a crime irregular migration, the irregular entry of a person to a territory of a country. Other times that doesn't occur, but detention of migrants is taking place on a massive scale. And more generally, through other measures, bans of certain type of migration, or this xenophobic discourse, a whole approach criminalizing migration takes place.
Thank you. I'd like to ask others, if you don't mind, and then we'll come back. Yes, Notimex.
Thank you. Mauricio Guerrero, Mexican News Agency, Notimex. When do you expect to receive a response from the U.S. government to your request? Is this delay normal? And then, are you planning to visit Mexico as well? Are you concerned with the treatment of Central American migrants in Mexico? And another question, do you consider visit countries of origin of migrants, for example, Central American countries, to do research on, you know, the reasons why they're migrating in such high numbers? Thank you.
Well, there isn't a deadline as such that is explicitly established in any provision for states to answer. But I would have hoped that at this point, 7 months after I requested the visit, the U.S. had responded to me in order to establish some dates. Also because the visits don't take place from one week to another, so this would require few months to make it practical. But I expect that this will occur at some point. Now, we as Special Rapporteurs have the chance to conduct only 2 to 3 visits every year, so we have to choose carefully the countries in the different continents. This year I went to Nepal, which is a country of origin of migrants, especially to the Middle East and also to some other countries, like India, Malaysia, South Korea. And most recently I was in Niger, which is a sort of laboratory of the European Union to some extent, in order to, as some people have called, to move the southern border. So in fact, half of Niger now is blocking migrants to go north to Libya or to Algeria. I have asked for the visits, in addition to the United States, to several countries of destination. I have received a positive response from Hungary, although it doesn't have many immigrants really, but it's mainly of destination. And also I asked for visits to South Africa, to Malaysia, which is both of origin and destination, to Saudi Arabia, to Kuwait, and to El Salvador, which has accepted the invitation that will take place next year. Yes, of course, at some point it would be interesting to conduct a visit to Mexico as well. I have been there since I started my mandate on several occasions, taken advantage of academic invitations. In those visits I have met with the authorities and with the civil society, so I have been following the situation in Mexico nonetheless.
Thank you. I think you had a question, yes, at the back.
Thank you. Giulia Pozzi, La Voce di New York, Italian Media. So in Italy there are some concerns about the new government policies on migrants, such as closing ports to force Europe to share responsibilities, but also a propaganda that identifies migrants as the real problem of Italy. So what do you think about that? Are you concerned?
Well, I was 6 days ago in Italy, in Palermo, in a festival of the Mediterranean culture, at which the issue of migration was the central one, and I participated in a panel about the solidarity with those NGOs which are helping migrants in the Mediterranean Sea to avoid their losing of their lives. I have called the attention of Italy in the past, and so as my predecessor did as well, with this devolution of migrants from the Mediterranean Sea to countries like Libya, where they are in extremely harsh conditions. many of them subject to torture, or they lost their lives. Women are being raped. Some people are being sold as slaves. I met many people in Niger who were in Libya who had undergone these terrible situations. So both in the case of Italy and more generally the European Union, it is very important that their policies and their agreements or commitments with countries from our continents are respecting human rights and the principle of non-refoulement, according to which you cannot send a person back to his or her country or to a third country where this person will have his or her life or integrity in peril. The other point is regarding the issue of xenophobic discourse, that it is very important that the states around the world gives the example of not using this as a political tool for winning elections or the like. In the case of Italy, I would add that Italy was for a long time a country of origin. There are many persons in Latin America who are from Italian origin, and they were well received in many of those countries. And at some point, situation might be the other way. I mean, so those who are countries of destination today were countries of origin yesterday and maybe of origin again tomorrow. So I think it is very important to keep this in mind, and I stress that in the case of the European countries.
Thank you. Yes. English, please. Thank you.
When you talk about xenophobia, that is something that we have seen in terms of the Venezuelan migration, especially lately. Countries in the region have met to try to face the possibility of acts of xenophobia, especially in Brazil and Peru, where they have had issues. What do you think a government or a state could do to try to face those issues? Because it comes beyond the government, it's people in the streets or feelings that have been roused. Do you think that also the rhetoric that is being presented by politicians and figures around the world, sometimes through Twitter or other social media, generate more of that reaction from people, and how affects those that are escaping from bad situations to try to settle in other places?
Well, first of all, the sole fact of governments avoiding a xenophobic discourse is very important. I mean, that abstention of a xenophobic discourse is very important, which not always occur. Having said that, it is important also that states have a positive discourse regarding migrants, so as to welcome them, so as to take effective steps to have integration, not assimilation, but integration of the migrants in the population. If a state has in place measures that will help the migrants to establish in the country, or might be in transit, but to provide if the state provides some assistance to a migrant, this will help the migrant to be to live there with dignity. And that will help the relationship with the nationals who live in the territory as well. If in the opposite case, if the migrant has to live in a ghetto or something like that, it will stigmatize by that. So the nationals will see this migrant as a person who is somehow related to criminal gangs or the organized crime or whatever bad. So I think those kind of measures will also help to avoid the xenophobia against migrants.
Thank you. Right, we have two more. Thank you.
A quick follow-up on the regional refugee crisis because of the Venezuelan migrants in South America mostly. From what you have seen in particular, coming from the answer that governments have had to this crisis, is there any kind of situation that concerns you, maybe from what you have seen in any kind of response? And in the future, is there anything that concerns you in particular on how the region has been dealing with this regional crisis that affects millions of Venezuelan citizens in South America anything that you can, highlight from what is happening there right now.
Right. Well, I think that it is very important that the situation of the Venezuelan migrants to other countries in Latin America is addressed in a multilateral manner, which started to occur only recently in Latin America, because it is really affecting a number of countries. I mean, it's a situation that has an impact in different countries. And in this regard, I will call the states to take seriously the requests for asylum that some Venezuelans migrants present. Also to determine where they deserve some sort of international protection. I read yesterday a judgment by the Audiencia Nacional in Spain that established that the Venezuelan migrants there, at least those who presented a complaint, although may not qualify for refugee status, deserve international protection and a residence permit. I think those type of initiatives should be taken seriously in Latin America, and some countries in Latin America have done so. Now, as a general matter, between the Latin American countries, there are no need for a visa, and I think it would be important to ensure that the requirement of a visa that some countries are establishing now in Latin America for the Venezuelan migrants doesn't impair them to move freely, really, given the conditions they're undergoing.
Thank you. I think you had another follow-up.
Just a quick follow-up on this caravan of migrants. Do you have any message specifically to the Mexican authorities and to the United States authorities, seeing as this is happening right now, as to how to deal with these people? Thank you.
Yes, well, I would call the governments of Mexico and the United States to seriously consider the human rights concerns of these persons. They're not moving just for coincidence from their own countries, but given certain conditions that are serious. And also that the respect of their rights mean that each and every case has to be individually considered, that there cannot be massive collective expulsions, for instance, in violation of international law, and that as the UN has said, and it's the purpose of the Global Compact, they should establish further channels to have a regular migration.
Thank you. Yes. Okay.
So just this morning, it's been reported that 6 Rohingya were killed in a blaze through an overcrowded camp, and we know the government.
Sorry,
Myanmar. In the Rohingya.
Myanmar.
So this morning, 6 Rohingya were killed in an overcrowded camp. We know that they're still through a dire situation after getting out of where they were living in. But the government has said that it is not a genocide. They said that it has never been a genocide against Rohingya. From your office, is it any opportunity to visit the area to try to dig a little deeper? Because we understand authorities have been very closed in into who they let in, who they let out, actually. And then how is this, from your point of view, going to ever or will be resolved for this community that now are in camps that are afraid to even move from where they are?
Well, let me explain you. In the UN machinery, the issue of migration is addressed by my office, and UNHCR addresses the issue of refugees, as a general matter. There isn't a special rapporteur on refugees, on the human rights of refugees. However, there is a gray zone there when persons who should have been granted the status of refugee do not get it granted because of procedural defects, because there isn't an adequate system in place to determine the status of the person. And in those cases, the persons remain as migrants, although technically they should be refugees. So most of the situation of the Myanmar, the refugees in Myanmar has been addressed by the UNHCR. But of course, I'm closely following the situation to evaluate the human rights impact that this may have.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll draw it to a close unless there's any further questions. And thank Mr. González Morales. He will be available for you to speak in Spanish afterwards. Thank you very much.